While most 9-year-old girls are fast asleep before midnight, Zariah Thompson sits on a cold hallway floor sketching circuit boards from memory as her mother cleans the night shift offices of a billion-dollar tech company. No one talks to her, some even look disgusted by the presence of a little black girl. But the next morning, when the entire company's system is paralyzed by a devastating cyber attack, not a single senior engineer or expert can locate the breach. It's Zariah, a 9-year-old black child, and with just one sentence she freezes the entire room. Stay with us to discover how a forgotten child rewired a billion-dollar empire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. While most 9-year-old girls are fast asleep before midnight, Zariah Thompson sits on a cold hallway floor sketching circuit boards from memory as her mother cleans the night shift offices of a billion-dollar tech company. No one talks to her, some even look disgusted by the presence of a little black girl. But the next morning, when the entire company's system is paralyzed by a devastating cyber attack, not a single senior engineer or expert can locate the breach. It's Zariah, a 9-year-old black child, and with just one sentence she freezes the entire room. Are you curious who this quiet girl is, the one with answers no one else has? And what happens when the man at the very top realizes she is the version of himself he once left behind? Stay with us to discover how a forgotten child rewired a billion-dollar empire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Zariah Thompson walked exactly 4 steps behind her mother, not because anyone told her to, but because she liked watching the way her mother moved through places that weren't meant for them. Her mother didn't look up, didn't flinch, didn't ask for permission to exist. She wore the same faded green polo shirt every night, tucked into black pants that had lost their shape, and carried a small spray bottle hooked to her hip. She moved like the floor didn't deserve to remember her footsteps. Her mother, Lorna, worked the graveyard shift at Novatech Systems, one of the biggest tech corporations on the East Coast. Every night at 7, Lorna tied her hair back with a faded cloth slipped on the blue janitor's vest that always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and signed in through the service entrance. Zariah never made a sound during that part. She held her mother's hand until they passed through the last security checkpoint. Then she let go and veered off to her usual corner of the first-floor lobby, a wide, polished expanse of white tile, high glass windows, and silence that didn't welcome voices like hers. She climbed onto the low leather bench by the wall and swung her legs slowly as her mother disappeared into the elevators with a mop bucket and supply cart. Then Zariah opened her notebook. The cover was frayed. The spiral binding had rust along the edges, but inside were not landscape paintings, nor beautiful dolls, nor simple calculations of 9-year-old children of the same age. Inside was a world only she understood, pages of circuits, drawn by hand diagrams of motherboards, imaginary processors she'd designed while watching old repair videos on public library computers. She didn't know the names of all the parts, but she knew what they did. She felt them, like puzzles that whispered where they belonged. Today, she was designing a chip that could interpret broken signals and reroute them, something that could hear what others couldn't, something that could turn distortion into clarity. She called it the filter loop. It didn't exist, not yet, but in her mind it was already working. The lobby buzzed with late arrivals. Business shoes clicked against tile. Elevator dings rang like bells. White men in fitted suits glanced at Zariah as they passed, then at her mother's cart parked near the hallway door. Some didn't say anything. Others did. She just gonna sit there like that? One man muttered to another. What is this bring your kid to work day for janitors? His friend laughed quietly and kept walking. A woman with bright red nails pulled her phone out and angled it low, pretending to scroll while her camera focused on Zariah. She whispered something to her colleague, and they both chuckled. One man, older, with thinning blonde hair and a badge clipped too high on his lapel, stopped in front of the bench. "This is not a daycare," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Somebody should tell her mother this isn't the projects. Zariah's pencil paused. Her grip tightened, but she didn't look up. Someone snorted. Another voice, younger, added, "She looks like she wandered in from a trash heap." "What's that?" "She's drawing gang signs." Zariah looked down at her notebook. She stared at the sketch of her chip, a tiny set of paths leading to an antenna-like spiral. It was messy, but it made sense to her. It made sense in a way nothing else in this building did. Her chest hurt, but she didn't cry. Her mother had told her once, if they don't see you, they can't stop you. Zariah had taken that advice to heart. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them and turned the page. A blank slate. She started again, sketching the next part of the circuit. In her mind, the chip didn't just filter static. It blocked noise. It silenced the words that didn't belong. She imagined plugging it into the air between her and them. Just one small device to erase cruelty before it reached her ears. The noise in the lobby faded as the elevators swallowed the men in suits, but their voices lingered in her head like smoke that wouldn't clear. Zariah had learned early not to take up space. At school, when she knew the answer before the teacher finished the question, she kept her hand down. When she figured out how to reset the school's smartboard by bypassing the frozen update loop, she didn't tell anyone. She liked being smart, but she also knew what it meant when someone like her got noticed for it. Her mother had learned it the hard way. Once, when Zariah was 5, her mother had suggested a faster way to clean the vents using a portable vac system. She was ignored. Then later, someone white, suggested the same thing and got a bonus. Her mother never said much after that, just did her job, kept her head down, and told Zariah to stay invisible until she had something no one could deny. But the world didn't always let you be invisible, especially not when you were black. Especially not when you were poor, especially not when your skin reminded people of all the things they tried to ignore. Zariah's breathing slowed as she kept drawing. Her legs stopped swinging. Her back straightened. She imagined her chip again now, with an additional layer, a built-in defense protocol. If the system detected hostility, it would reroute power and seal off emotional responses. Not numbness, just strategic focus. Across the lobby, a man in a gray vest glanced at her again. This time he didn't say anything, but his face said enough. Disapproval, dismissal. He looked at her like she was a stain someone had forgotten to scrub out. Zariah returned her gaze to the page. Her lines were sharper now, darker. She imagined the chip breathing beneath her pencil tip, filtering, strengthening, holding space. She didn't want to be a problem. She didn't want to be a miracle either. She just wanted to be left alone to build things that worked better than the world around her. Her stomach growled quietly, but she ignored it. She'd eaten a peanut butter sandwich 2 hours ago in the supply closet while her mother changed into her uniform. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her steady for a few hours. She didn't need more than that, not when she had something to build. Behind the front desk, the receptionist barely glanced her way. She was used to seeing Zariah now. Never said a word, never asked questions. Zariah liked that. The bench creaked slightly as she shifted her weight. She flipped another page, this one filled with strange symbols, her own language, a mix of code and wiring logic. It didn't mean anything to anyone else, but to her it was the blueprint of a different kind of future. She thought of the way people had looked at her just now, the tone in their voices, the arrogance, the entitlement. And she thought of the chip again. This time she imagined it scanning the room for threats, not physical ones, but the quieter kind. The smirks, the whispers, the cameras pretending not to be cameras. It would scan and then respond not with violence, not with retreat, but with clarity. A calm, alert bias detected, neutralize with excellence. Her mother always told her, they can laugh now, but one day they'll ask you how you did it. Zariah wasn't sure if that day would ever come, but she kept drawing anyway. Because even if the world refused to see the value in her small brown hands or the power behind her silent eyes, she saw herself. And tonight, that had to be enough. It started at 8:32, just as the building hit full capacity. One by one, monitors across Novatech's gleaming 26-story headquarters blinked off. At first, it was subtle, just a few black screens near the finance department, a flickering toolbar in project management. Then it spread. Fast. By 8:34, the elevators froze between floors. Badge scanners flashed red. Every status light on the server panels inside IT dimmed to 0. Then came the alarms. A low mechanical pulse, soft at first, then building in tempo. Zariah didn't move from her bench in the lobby. She simply looked up from her notebook as the first wave of confusion began to ripple outward. A man in a blue suit stepped off the elevator, stared at his phone, and frowned. "Why can't I connect to anything?" he muttered. He tried again. What the hell? Behind him, a young woman wearing a lanyard heavy with access cards stared at her frozen laptop screen. Is this? "Is this a power thing?" she asked out loud. From the hallway to the main atrium, voices rose. Confusion sharpened into panic. A senior manager yelled from the glass conference room upstairs. "Why are we locked out of the cloud network?" a voice answered from across the open plan floor. "Remote access is dead pings, not even returning a value." "What do you mean, dead?" someone barked. "Gone. Cold, like it was never there." In the IT room on the 12th floor, 4 engineers stood frozen in front of a wall of diagnostic screens, now all black. The lead engineer, Grant, leaned in and tapped a few keys on his command terminal. Nothing. He looked up. His jaw tightened. "DNS poisoned. We've got spoofed packets rerouting internal traffic through external sinks." Another engineer, Marisol, pale with disbelief, whispered, "That's not just a bug. That's deliberate." By 8:37, department heads were shouting over each other. "It's the data lake. Someone's flooded it with encrypted traffic. Check the firewalls. See if they've been overridden." They have. Everything's looping back to localhost, but with no shell access. It's a ghost loop. A recursive lockout. Zarya tilted her head. She didn't understand all the words, not yet, but she knew the tone. She had seen it before. It was the same tone her cousin used the day he panicked after wiping the bootloader on his old gaming PC. A man in a charcoal blazer pulled his headset off and slammed it on the reception desk. "We've lost the system. The entire system." Behind him, a woman in heels too high to run in checked her tablet, shaking her head as if disbelief could reset it. "The investor deck is gone. Presentation files corrupted. Nothing's syncing. Nothing's loading." The receptionist whispered something into her mic. The line crackled, then cut off. She blinked at her dashboard. Phones are out. Landlines, too. By 8:41, Marcus Vale, CEO of Novatech Systems, was already on his 3rd failed call. His jaw clenched. "Try the emergency backup protocols," he said to his assistant. "I want a mirror of every core system in under 5 minutes. The assistant tapped frantically on her touchscreen. "Sir, the mirror drives aren't responding. The backups, they were overwritten last night." He looked at her like she had just spoken a foreign language. "What do you mean overwritten?" She swallowed hard. "They're gone. Logs say restore points are intact but inaccessible. It's like they're there but not usable." That's when Marcus understood. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a freak failure or a line of bad code. This was a breach. A full, silent, calculated breach. And it had hit them on the worst possible day, the same morning they were set to unveil their billion-dollar security architecture to potential investors from Tokyo, Berlin, and Toronto. It was supposed to be flawless, untouchable, a system built with resilience and redundancy, they said, words printed in gold on brochures. And now, the only thing Novatech had left was red screens and rising voices. In the lobby, the marble floor vibrated with the thud of rushed footsteps. Executives moved with purpose, but not direction. Engineers shouted across floors, relaying error codes that meant nothing now. The AI response team tried running diagnostic simulations, but every command was rejected by a system that no longer belonged to them. One of the technical leads whispered the phrase that no one wanted to say out loud: remote root lock. Someone's got admin. Someone had buried themselves inside the code. They didn't destroy the system. They sealed it. The architecture was still there. The framework still intact. But every door had been welded shut. People scrambled to assign blame. "Who tested the patch last week? You said we reinforced the firewall loop. Why is the multi-factor protocol not kicking in?" A younger engineer blurted out. "Because the attacker didn't brute force it. They danced around it, mimicked clean traffic." Another voice, older, more tired, followed. "They didn't walk through the door. They became the door." At 8:48, Marcus gathered the executive leadership in the central war room. A sleek, glass-walled meeting space built for strategy, not panic. Everyone was talking. No one was listening. Zarya could hear their voices even from the lobby. She closed her notebook. The pencil rested quietly on the open page, her drawing half finished, the chip forgotten. The building smelled different now. Less like polished stone and lemon cleaner, more like sweat, tension, fear. The kind of fear that adults tried to hide behind meetings and titles. But fear had a smell. Zarya had learned that from the shelter days. No one had answers. No one had calm. And yet, these were the people who had told her mother to avoid messing with the servers, who once warned her not to let that little girl touch anything expensive. Now the little girl sat alone in the lobby, while million-dollar engineers couldn't reboot a login screen. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just sat quietly watching the unraveling. Because sometimes when systems fall apart, they don't do it loudly. They do it exactly like this, cleanly, quietly, and completely. As she looked toward the war room, she saw suits, pacing fingers, pointing people sweating under perfect lighting. It didn't matter how many degrees they had. Didn't matter how many zeros were on their checks. Right now, all those credentials meant nothing because they didn't know what to do. And Zariah did. She didn't know why. She just felt it, like a thread pulling in her chest, like a whisper in a language only she understood. A part of her wanted to stand up, walk in, say what she was thinking. But she didn't. Not yet, because she knew what would happen. They would laugh. They would dismiss her. They always did. And still she couldn't look away, because somewhere in that building was a locked door. And she had seen doors like that before. She knew how to knock. But first, she waited. Let them panic. Let them run in circles. Because sooner or later someone would have to admit it. They didn't know where the weakness was until it failed. They didn't see the hole in their armor until the sword was already through. And when they finally hit bottom, maybe then someone would turn toward the quiet girl in the lobby and ask the question they should have asked long ago. Do you see something we don't? But that moment hadn't come yet. For now, the building burned in silence, and Zariah watched. Zariah didn't move from the bench. The marble floor beneath her felt colder now. The light overhead flickered just once before steadying again. The buzz of panic from the upper floors hadn't slowed. It had only grown sharper, more fragmented, more desperate. Conversations bled into each other. Voices cracked with urgency. Everyone in the building was talking except her. She sat with her hands in her lap, her notebook still open, the pencil tucked into the crease between 2 pages. The page in front of her held no new diagrams, only faint eraser marks, remnants of ideas that couldn't survive this kind of noise. She wasn't drawing anymore. She was listening. The words floated down the hallways and into the lobby like static trying to form a clear signal. Reinforce the token wall. They must have gotten in through the API stack. No, this isn't brute force. It's too smooth. Then it's internal. It has to be internal. No one internally has root access. Zariah's ears filtered the noise. Her mind sorted each word by function. Some she didn't understand, but many she did. DNS poisoned. That meant someone had redirected their digital traffic through fake paths. She had read about that once. Encrypted flood. That meant too much data hidden in complex wrappers clogging the servers. Remote root lock. That meant total control had been taken, and not by anyone who was supposed to have it. She didn't need to see the terminals to know what was happening. She could feel it in the way people moved, in the way their voices bounced against the polished stone walls. This was not a glitch, not a hiccup in the system. This was a collapse. She looked toward the hallway leading to the war room. She couldn't see them, but she could imagine their faces. The frowns, the sweat, the shifting blame. The engineers and executives with titles longer than most names frozen in a glass room, grasping at technical jargon like it might save them. They didn't know what to do, and they were saying everything except what needed to be said. She took a breath. Small, quiet, controlled. Then she stood up. Not fast, not dramatic. She simply rose to her feet, walked softly across the lobby, and stood near the edge of the glass stairwell. From where she was, she could see the figures in the war room, pacing. No one looked at her. No one noticed. They were too busy watching each other fail. She waited for a moment when the talking dipped just for a second. A pause in the argument, a beat between blame and panic. And then she spoke. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. Have you checked the overflow buffer on the input loop? The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They hung in the air like something sharp, something delicate, something that didn't belong in the chaos, but now demanded to be part of it. One of the engineers, a man with wide shoulders and a tense jawline, turned toward the sound. What? His voice was loud, defensive. Another engineer looked up, eyes narrowing. Who said that Zariah didn't repeat herself? She just stood there, hands clasped in front of her eyes, steady. The room went still. A few people chuckled, that low kind of laugh people give when they feel threatened by something they don't expect. Is that the janitor's kid, Jesus? What the hell is she doing in here? A woman in a gray suit leaned toward the glass, squinting. Is she serious? The older man near the center table, Grant the lead, spoke without looking at her. Somebody get her out of here. But before anyone moved, another voice spoke, a younger one, from the back of the room. Wait, he said. What did she say? The others turned. It was Malik, the intern. He was the youngest in the room by at least a decade, still wore sneakers with his slacks, still took notes by hand when everyone else used tablets. She said the overflow buffer on the input loop, he repeated. Then slower, that's not random. The room hesitated, just enough to notice Malik turned toward Grant. We never tested the overflow sequence during async input simulation. Grant scoffed, because it was ruled low priority. Yeah, Malik said, but what if that's where the lockout starts? Recursive triggers from an unchecked buffer could mask as internal error logs. That would explain why none of the firewall triggers tripped. There was silence, not because they all suddenly believed it, but because none of them had a better theory. One of the analysts spoke, voice dry. We're really taking security advice from a child now. Malik didn't flinch. We're not taking advice. We're considering a variable no one in this room thought to check. He looked at Zariah. Not like she was a joke. Not like she was a mistake. Just like she was a person who said something worth hearing. Grant crossed his arms. What's your name, girl? Zariah didn't answer. Not out of fear. Not out of disrespect. But because no one had earned that answer yet. Malik stepped forward, standing a little taller. Maybe instead of yelling, we should just look. Just check the buffer. It'll take 2 minutes. One of the engineers at the console pulled up the test interface. His fingers hovered. You want me to run a dry trace on the overflow logic? Malik nodded. The man sighed, then typed. Seconds passed. Then the screen changed. No blinking error. No crash. Just a quiet flag. A loop running in the background, feeding back into itself. What the? The analyst whispered. It's hiding inside an input redundancy loop. It's elegant, said another. Too elegant. It mimics internal behavior almost perfectly. Zariah didn't smile. She didn't move. She just waited, because she hadn't spoken to prove anything. She hadn't spoken to be heard. She had spoken because she saw the thread no one else could see. And now they had seen it too. A door had opened. Not wide. Not all the way. But enough. Enough to remind everyone that brilliance doesn't always come from the top floor. That answers don't always come from the loudest voice. And that sometimes the only person who understands the problem is the one no one asked. Zariah turned to walk back toward her bench. Her hands were steady. Her heart was quiet. She didn't need applause. She had already done what most grown men in that room couldn't do. She had seen what mattered, and she had spoken, because genius doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be right. Grant scoffed first. He turned fully toward Zariah, folded his arms, and chuckled like he'd just heard a bad joke from a late-night TV rerun. Well, that settles it, he said loud enough for everyone in the war room to hear. We've hit rock bottom. Now the kindergarten class is doing threat assessment. A few people laughed, nervous, uneasy laughter that filled the silence left behind by the trace logs still loading on screen. One man muttered under his breath, might as well give her a juice box and let her reboot the server while she's at it. Another added, did she pick that phrase up from YouTube Kids or something? Zariah stood completely still outside the glass wall, her hands at her sides, eyes unmoving. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't drop her gaze. But inside her chest, something tightened. She felt her fingers curl slightly, not from fear, from restraint. It wasn't the first time grown men had laughed at her, but hearing it echo off marble floors in a building that claimed to lead the future, that cut deeper. Marcus Vale entered the room exactly 12 seconds later. He moved fast but silent, like a man who didn't waste motion. His shirt cuffs were still perfectly pressed, his face unreadable beneath calm eyes and a clipped beard. He looked around once, registered the tension, then spotted Zariah through the glass. What is this? He asked flatly. Grant nodded toward the girl. A suggestion from the lobby. Overflow buffer. Came from her. Marcus didn't blink. Who is she? Janitorial staff's kid, someone offered. She was sitting out there with a notebook. Another added. Then she spoke up. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. He took a few steps closer to the glass hands behind his back. She's not authorized to be in here, he said. Right. Grant replied, eager to agree. I was just about to call security. Honestly, this whole thing is a distraction. Then do it, Marcus said. Get her out. His voice was steel. He turned toward his assistant. Now. The woman nodded and reached for her phone. That's when Malik stepped forward. He'd been quiet until now, hovering in the back of the room, shifting between anxiety and observation. But now his voice cut through the tension like a thread pulled taut. Her question made sense. Marcus turned. Excuse me. Malik didn't back down. He stood up straighter. His voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. She wasn't guessing. She saw something we didn't. The overflow buffer isn't just a throwaway term, it's a logical entry point for a recursive failure. If we'd thought to check it earlier, we might not be standing here talking about root-level lockdowns. Marcus stared at him, cold, calculating. You're backing her. Malik nodded once. Yes. Grant scoffed again. Jesus, are we seriously entertaining this? Give me another option, Malik said sharply. Please. Give me one viable path to root recovery that we haven't already exhausted. Grant opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The room fell still. Marcus walked closer to the glass. He studied Zariah through it like he was trying to decode her face. She didn't look back at him. She kept her eyes focused on the floor, jaw clenched, arms still. He turned to his assistant. How long have we been down? Just over 32 minutes, she answered. And what progress have we made? The assistant hesitated. We've isolated the loop, but haven't regained control. Marcus exhaled through his nose. He looked back toward Grant. You've burned half our diagnostics, locked out of your own tool chain. Investors calling by the minute. And your best answer is to dismiss the only new idea in the room because it came from a child. Grant bristled. With all due respect, sir, she's not trained. She's not credentialed. We don't even know what she's seen. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Neither do you. That didn't stop you from charging into the console like you knew everything 5 minutes ago. No one spoke. Finally, Marcus turned toward Malik. You said her question made sense. Malik nodded again. Yes, sir. Then she gets one shot. He turned to the security guard who had just arrived outside the door. Stand down. Then he looked at Zariah for the first time and spoke directly to her. You want to try something, he said. You've got one chance, but if you break anything further, you're out. No discussion, no warning. Zariah didn't answer right away. She looked past him at the screens. She could see the looping trace, the frozen script still running, like a record skipping on a bad needle. Then she nodded once, not out of excitement, not out of permission-seeking, just quiet certainty. Marcus stepped aside. Let her in. No one clapped, no one smiled. They just watched, not because they believed, but because they had nothing left to believe in. Zariah walked through the war room door with her notebook in one hand and her shoulders straight. Malik moved to the side and pulled out a stool. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She sat down, opened her notebook to a fresh page, and reached for the keyboard. Behind her, a half-circle of grown men and women in tailored clothes stood in silence, watching a 9-year-old girl prepare to touch the system they had all failed to understand. They didn't trust her, they barely tolerated her, but they let her try. Not because of respect, because of desperation. And sometimes that's how cracks start in walls that were never meant to break, not with belief, but with nothing left to lose. Because when the people at the top run out of options, that's when they finally remember to look down and see who's been sitting quietly this whole time. The room was silent as Zariah approached the terminal. The workstation was designed for adult engineers, double monitors, wide mechanical keyboard, overhead lighting, tuned for long hours of debugging. But as she stood before it, she didn't hesitate. She glanced at the chair. It was too tall for her. Without a word, she reached down, pulled the stool Malik had rolled toward her, and climbed up with quiet precision. Her sneakers, slightly scuffed at the toe, found balance on the metal bar across the base. She adjusted her footing, leaned forward, and rested both hands on the edge of the desk. The keyboard was cold. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For a moment, she didn't move. Not out of doubt, not out of fear. She was calibrating, the way a pianist tests a bench before performing. The air behind her was thick. Dozens of adults stood watching. Some crossed their arms. Others whispered behind closed lips. A few kept their hands in their pockets, not out of comfort, but because they didn't know what else to do with them. Marcus stood near the back wall, his eyes fixed on Zariah. His jaw was clenched, but he said nothing. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone. Zariah was already somewhere else. In her mind, she was back at home, sitting on the floor beside a busted microwave her neighbor had thrown away. She had taken the circuit board out, cleaned off the blackened solder, and remapped the voltage path with a pencil and masking tape. She remembered how the diodes had clicked beneath her fingernails, how the heat from the resistor smelled like dust and determination. She began typing. No hesitation, no second-guessing. The screen flickered as her first command took hold. Shell access denied. She tried a different path. Temporary root denied. She switched tactics, probing, not through brute force, but with finesse. Her fingers moved fast, not in a showy way, but with the familiarity of someone who had lived in systems like this for years. She wasn't trying to crack the network. She was talking to it, coaxing it open one layer at a time. Behind her, a senior engineer whispered to the analyst next to him, "She's not checking the documentation." The analyst frowned. "She's not checking anything. She's just typing." Malik stood at the corner of the console. His hands were tight at his sides, but his face showed something the others hadn't caught yet: recognition. He saw it in the way she moved, not just her fingers, but her posture. Calm, controlled. She wasn't reacting. She was leading. "She knows what she's doing," he said, barely loud enough for anyone else to hear. Grant shook his head. "You can't just intuit your way into a security architecture." But Zarya was doing just that. The system had been sealed by recursive locking deep-level code that rerouted authorization requests into fake subshells. Every step forward was a trap designed to mimic valid pathways, confuse admins, and waste time. Zarya didn't walk forward. She moved sideways. Every terminal response gave her more than error codes, it gave her clues. Lines of syntax, certain spacing patterns, even the way failed commands timed out. She watched everything. She redirected access from the main shell to a lesser-known debug module, something hidden behind an obsolete patch version that most teams had forgotten existed. The terminal blinked. A new shell opened. A sharp inhale came from somewhere behind her. No one dared speak. The display filled with raw strings, encrypted metadata, traffic logs, access routes. It was like watching a door unlock not with a key, but with the memory of what the key used to look like. Zarya didn't pause. She opened a side window, isolated the overflow input buffer, and began mapping the anomaly that had triggered the loop. She didn't run diagnostics. She didn't check with anyone. She worked. Every stroke of the key sounded louder now. Sharper, final. The kind of sound people don't forget, because it came from someone they never expected to hear. Marcus leaned in, slightly, eyes narrowing. "She's not just guessing," he murmured. "She's remembering," Malik added. Another window opened. Internal routing logs, the ones that had been corrupted earlier. Zarya accessed them manually, bypassing interface tools and hard-coding access requests. It was impossible, but it was happening. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her back stayed straight. In that moment, Zarya didn't look like a child. She looked like someone who knew exactly where she was and who had been waiting for this moment longer than anyone realized. Grant folded his arms, still not convinced. "Even if she finds something, how do we verify it?" "She already did," said Malik. Everyone turned to him. "She's not asking for permission," he continued. "She's already inside. That's further than any of us got." Marcus stayed silent. His arms were crossed now, but not out of defiance. It was something closer to restraint. He was watching her not to judge, but to understand. The room stayed frozen. Zarya opened one more window, typed a short line of code. Then she stopped. Not because she was done, because she had arrived. She was at the center now, the part of the system no one else had reached. She glanced down at her notebook still closed beside her. She hadn't opened it once, not because she didn't need it, because she already knew everything inside it. That was the difference. That was why she was here. She lifted her hands from the keyboard, let the code settle. Then she looked up for the first time. Her eyes met no one's in particular. But the message was clear. She had come this far alone. She didn't need to be told what to do. She just needed them not to stop her. Because sometimes you don't need someone to teach you. You just need them to move out of the way and let you work. Zarya adjusted the screen brightness slightly. She wasn't doing it for comfort. She was doing it to see more clearly lines of shell script cascading across the right side terminal in dense, efficient syntax. It was beautiful in a strange way. Compact, purposeful, too purposeful. She leaned closer. The sequence running the recursive lockout wasn't just smart, it was familiar. She blinked once, then twice. No one else in the room could read it like she did. To them, it was a snarl of commands and memory blocks, but to her, it looked like a language she hadn't spoken in a long time. She scrolled up, then paused at the top of the shell loop, and there it was, a fragment of code that unlocked something not in the system, but in her memory. She had seen this before. The formatting, the naming conventions, the compactness of it stripped of comments like someone was coding in the dark, just hoping the thing would run before anyone noticed. Her stomach tightened. She remembered it now. A dusty online forum, Back when she was 7, she wasn't even supposed to be online at that time of night, but her mom was working overtime, and Zariah had found an old cracked phone in the lost and found bin of their apartment laundry room. She used to log into that forum just to read Never Post. She couldn't have. She didn't even know how to register without giving up information she wasn't supposed to have. But she watched, she copied, she learned. And there was one user. Their username was just 5 random letters and numbers. No avatar, no bio. But everything they posted caught her attention. They never bragged, they never explained. They just uploaded snippets, shell bypasses, debug workarounds, network pings that disguised themselves as timeouts. She saved all of them. Most were too complicated at the time, but she kept going back, reading, comparing, testing. And now she was looking at a variation of that same code. The attack script in the Novatech system was built from the same foundation. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but her mind wasn't in the room anymore. She imagined the person who had written it, not some hardened cyber criminal in a dark hoodie, a kid, somewhere, maybe a basement, maybe a shelter, someone like her, alone, overlooked, hungry not just for food, but for something to make them feel real. Someone who had started just like her, learning without permission, building without praise. Only difference, they had turned left, while she had turned right. She breathed in slow. For the first time since this began, Zariah wasn't thinking about fixing Novatech's system. She was thinking about herself, about what she could have become if no one had let her draw, if no one had handed her that broken radio last year, if Malik hadn't stopped Marcus from throwing her out of the room 15 minutes ago. What if the person behind this wasn't evil? What if they were just abandoned? She felt a chill run through her spine. Her hands moved again, but slower this time. She was tracing the code not just as a threat, but as a message. It wasn't optimized. It wasn't polished. It was desperate. There were places where the code looped more times than it needed to, redundancies that weren't mistakes, but hesitation. Like whoever wrote it wasn't sure it would work. Like they couldn't test it because they didn't have the tools, or the time, or the chance. Zariah blinked hard, pushing the thought away. Behind her, the room stayed silent. Everyone still watching, still unsure what to make of her. She didn't care. Not anymore, because she had just realized this wasn't about just fixing the code. This was about choosing who she wanted to be, and making sure she didn't become the person who had written it. Her voice was quiet when she spoke, not to anyone in particular, but it cut through the silence. They weren't trying to destroy the system. Malik leaned in. What they were trying to be heard, she said. The way they built this. It's loud, but it's not messy. It's careful, like someone trying to prove they exist. She pointed to a section of code. They built a back door, but they never used it to take anything. They just locked it to make a point. Marcus walked forward. What kind of point? Zariah didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the keyboard, then back at the code. That they're still out there, she whispered. That they never got the chance she was getting right now. And that maybe, just maybe, they were hoping someone would notice. Her hand moved again. She opened a secure window and began isolating the attack layer. Not to destroy it, but to understand it, to learn from it. Her heart beat faster now, but not from fear, from resolve. Because in the broken lines of this malicious code, she didn't see an enemy. She saw a mirror, and it scared her. But it also reminded her why she couldn't stop now. Because no one is born to destroy. They only reach for it when no one gives them another way. And sometimes the best way to fight back is to choose the other path. Marcus Vale stood behind the glass, his arms crossed tightly, fingertips pressing into his biceps. He wasn't looking at the lines of code on the monitor. He wasn't tracking the updates on the system dashboard. He was watching her. Zariah's shoulders were still, her fingers moving, like they had memorized every step of the puzzle. No noise, no theatrics, just focus, just truth. He'd seen this before. Not the code, the posture, the stillness. He closed his eyes for a second, just one. And in that second, the war room disappeared. He was 11 again, standing in the hallway of St. Teresa's home for boys. The tile floor was cold on bare feet. Across the hall, through a half-open door, was the girl from the East Wing. She always kept to herself, always had something broken in her hands. Broken toys, broken flashlights, broken radios. One day, he asked her why. She didn't even look up. "If I fix this," she said, holding up a busted radio with the antenna snapped off, "maybe I'll hear something good for once." not just yelling. Marcus never forgot the way she said that. He also never saw her again. A week later, she was gone. Adopted runaway. No one ever told him. He moved on, moved up, built walls between then and now. Every decision since had been about going forward, degrees funding startups, the boardroom, the glass office, progress, respect, control. But now he was watching a little black girl sit at a machine he couldn't understand anymore, and he wasn't sure who he was looking at more, her or himself. Zariah leaned into the keyboard again. She hadn't looked back once, hadn't asked for help, hadn't asked for permission, just like the girl with the broken radio. A small voice crept up from his chest, uninvited. You've been running from her all your life. The memory hit hard, not just because it was true, but because he realized he hadn't thought about that girl in over 20 years. He remembered how angry he used to get when someone called him lucky. They didn't see the nights he spent recoding job application forms so they'd accept his zip code. They didn't know how many times he'd been told, "You're articulate," like it was some kind of surprise. They didn't know what it felt like to have to cut parts of yourself just to fit into rooms like this one. But still, he had made it. And in the process, he had shut the door behind him. He had told himself it was the only way. You don't rise in this world with empathy. You rise with sharp edges. But now, standing here watching Zariah work, he wasn't sure that edge had made him stronger. It had just made him harder to recognize. Behind him, Grant spoke in a whisper. We're wasting time. Marcus didn't respond. She's just a kid, Grant said. Still silence. She might break something. Marcus's voice was cold when he finally answered. Something already broke, he said. Grant blinked, but Marcus kept his eyes forward. This system, this company, this place. It broke the minute no one in this room could imagine she might have the answer. His voice wasn't angry. It was quiet, tired. The war room fell back into stillness. Marcus stepped closer to the glass, now barely a foot away from Zariah. She still hadn't looked up. He noticed how her feet dangled just above the floor, how her notebook, tattered, filled with scribbled schematics, sat open beside her, untouched. She hadn't referenced it once. She didn't need to. He did. He needed to remember, because he was the one who forgot. He was the boy who wanted to build satellites in his backyard. The teenager who used to code between shifts, washing dishes at a gas station. The college freshman who got mistaken for the janitor in his first AI lab. And now, he was the man in the suit. Telling a child not to touch the keyboard. The shame sat heavy on his shoulders. It wasn't the shame of a mistake. It was the shame of a pattern. Zariah adjusted the code window again, scrolling back to the root line. Her movements were fast, but not rushed. Her breathing even. Marcus could see it now. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't luck. This was fluency. He remembered something else the girl at the orphanage said once on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. If nobody talks to me, it's okay. I'll learn from the machines. He hadn't understood it then. He did now. Behind every machine was a person. Behind every code line, a fingerprint. Zariah wasn't just solving a problem. She was proving her existence. And he had almost thrown her out. Because he was scared of the version of himself she reminded him of. Because she still had the thing he buried a long time ago, belief, without bitterness. He stepped back slowly. Malik glanced at him, unsure what to make of the change in his expression. Marcus didn't speak, but he did something else. He sat down, not at the head of the table, not in front of a screen. He sat on the edge of the low bench by the wall, watching, like a student again, for the first time in decades. Because sometimes the biggest failure isn't missing the solution, it's missing the person who carries it. And sometimes what we've tried hardest to forget comes back to us, not as punishment, but as a second chance, to do better, to be the man we once needed. The next evening, Marcus stood in front of a faded green door at the end of a narrow hallway in a public housing block on the west edge of the city. He hesitated before knocking. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and fried onions. A box fan buzzed somewhere behind the thin walls. Children were laughing upstairs, loud thuds shaking the ceiling. He shifted the small brown bag in his hands, a box of tools brand new. Not because he thought she needed them, but because it was the only gesture he could think of that wouldn't feel like charity. The door creaked open. Zariah's mother stood there surprised. Her eyes widened for a moment, then quickly softened with recognition. She was still in her navy blue janitorial uniform, her name stitched neatly above the pocket. T. Thompson. Mr. Vale, she said cautiously, you came all this way. Marcus nodded, offering a small smile. I hope I'm not interrupting. She stepped aside. No, come in. We're just settling down after dinner. He ducked into the apartment. 2 bedrooms, 5 people, a folding table in the kitchen that doubled as homework station and meal prep, 1 standing fan in the living room that barely turned anymore. The walls were clean, but cracked. 1 light bulb flickered above the couch. A small TV played static with the volume muted. But it wasn't the poverty that caught him off guard. It was the silence of resilience. No one was yelling. No one was complaining. The children moved around each other with instinctual choreography. Zariah sat on the floor near the back corner of the living room. She didn't look up. Not right away. She was kneeling in front of something Marcus couldn't quite see yet until he walked closer. Then he froze. In the far corner of the apartment between the couch and the exposed radiator was a world. Not a child's play area, a lab. There were dismantled toys with wires pulled like veins across the floor, battery cells made from lemons, salt water, and coins, breadboards with LEDs blinking in slow pulses. A laptop with a cracked hinge sat on top of a milk crate, its motherboard half exposed, held together with rubber bands and copper tape. On the wall beside it, a piece of cardboard had been duct-taped flat and hand-drawn into a circuit map. Not copied, created. Marcus crouched slowly, letting his knees touch the floor. Zariah finally looked up. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But her eyes, they didn't hold the fear or hesitation she showed back at Novatech. They were calm, grounded. This was her space, her rules. I wanted to see where it all started, Marcus said quietly. Zariah looked at the broken walkie-talkie in her lap. The circuit inside had been stripped, rewired, and patched with aluminum foil. I fix things here, she said. Not because someone asked me to, because you want to understand them. He finished. She nodded. Tea. Thompson returned with a glass of water and set it on the table, watching them from a distance. Marcus ran his hand across one of the old keyboards. Several keys were replaced with paper labels. This isn't school, he said. No, Zariah replied. It's better. He laughed under his breath, not at her, but in stunned admiration. Do you know what most people would say about this place, he asked. They'd say it's not enough. Not safe, not stable. Zariah didn't blink. It's where I learned everything, she said, with broken stuff, with no manuals, with no one teaching me. He turned to face her. Then how did you learn? She pointed to her head. I just kept watching, listening, trying again. The light above flickered once more. And now Marcus didn't see poverty. He saw patience, discipline, an entire world built in the cracks of what society had thrown away. He looked around again. The apartment wasn't big. The furniture was worn. But the brilliance in that corner, it could power a $1,000 lab, not with electricity, but with fire. The kind you don't buy, the kind you don't fake. Zariah was quiet now, resuming her work. Her fingers adjusted a resistor, checked a voltage with a makeshift multimeter that looked like it had once been part of a broken toy cash register. Marcus exhaled. His voice was soft. I didn't know this was what I was turning away from. She didn't look up. Most people don't. He smiled. You don't pull punches, do you? No, she said plainly. I don't have time. Behind them, her siblings argued playfully over a coloring book. Her mother tapped one on the shoulder, guiding them back to the kitchen with a gentle word. Marcus stood, slowly brushing dust off his slacks. He handed the brown box to Zariah, who looked at it suspiciously. It's not a gift, he said. Then what is it? A tool set. High-res solder custom pliers, insulated grips. Stuff I wish someone had given me when I was your age. Zariah opened the lid. Her eyes scanned every item, one by one. She didn't smile, but she nodded, the way a builder might nod at good materials before starting a project. Marcus looked back at her mother. She built this whole thing, he said. Yes, her mother replied. We couldn't afford after-school programs. But she found broken electronics in alley dumpsters, came home with a trash bag once full of broken holiday lights. Marcus let out a low whistle. Her mother's voice softened. She doesn't need much, just space, and to be left alone sometimes. He nodded slowly, because now he understood. Zariah didn't need a lab. She didn't need a badge. She just needed one thing: for the world to stop pretending she didn't exist. And finally, after all the board meetings, the security checks, the degrees, and the rules, Marcus saw something no report or hiring panel ever told him. Genius does not wait for permission. It grows in corners no one checks. And sometimes the most powerful systems in the world are powered by a child on the floor, soldering hope together from pieces everyone else forgot. He turned to leave. Zariah, he said. She didn't stop working, but she tilted her head. We'll make room for you, he said. Not just at Novatech, but in every place that said no before you even knocked. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to, because she had already made room for herself. 3 days later, the lights at Novatech's headquarters were back to normal. The servers hummed softly behind secure glass walls. The investor presentations had been rescheduled. The emergency passed, but something had changed permanently in the air, like the building itself knew someone new had earned her place here. Marcus stood in front of the engineering floor's security terminal, holding a small black card in his hand. He looked at the name freshly printed in white letters across the bottom, Zariah Thompson Full Access. Next to her name, the words Special Systems Advisor had been typed in manually. There was no department attached, no manager listed. She didn't need one. The elevator dinged. Zariah stepped out, wearing an oversized Novatech hoodie that nearly touched her knees. Her mother had refused to let her come alone, but stood by the lobby, letting the girl walk up by herself. Marcus met her halfway. He didn't offer a handshake. He offered the badge. Zariah took it carefully. She flipped it over in her palm, looked at the embedded chip, the magnetic strip, the barcode. She didn't say thank you. She asked a question. So, does this mean I get to break stuff? Now Marcus paused. Then for the first time in years, he laughed. Not a forced boardroom laugh. A real one. It came from the belly pulled from some dusty drawer of his childhood. Zariah blinked. Was that a yes? He nodded, still smiling. It means we trust you enough to take things apart, because that's the only way we're going to build something better. She clipped the badge to her hoodie. It hung crooked. She didn't fix it. I learn faster when I can see what's inside, she said. Marcus crouched slightly to meet her eye level. And if you break it, I fix it better. He stood up again. That's what real learning is, he said. Not doing it right the first time, but being brave enough to touch something without knowing all the answers. Zariah looked around the room. Men in shirts and ties, women with tablets and security clearances. All of them turned to glance at the girl, now walking past them like she belonged, because she did. She paused beside a giant terminal console. Her fingers hovered just above the touchscreen, not touching, just thinking. Marcus stayed a step behind her. You ever heard the phrase fail-safe? He asked. Zariah nodded. It's when a system protects itself if something goes wrong. He tilted his head. You're our new fail-safe. She looked confused. I thought fail-safes were machines. Sometimes, he said, but sometimes they're people who see the cracks before anyone else. She smiled barely, then reached into her backpack and pulled out her notebook, the one with the frayed cover, pages filled with circuitry sketches and code written in pen. She tore out a page and handed it to him. What's this? He asked. A new way to route the backup firmware through the local server instead of waiting on the cloud response. It's faster. Marcus raised his eyebrows. Did you test it? Zariah grinned. Nope. You said I get to break stuff. He held the paper like it was worth more than stock options. You're right, he said. I did. They walked together down the hallway. Not as CEO and guest, not as boss and intern, but as two people who had both in very different ways spent their childhoods unscrewing things that didn't work and wondering why nobody ever asked what they thought. Zariah pointed to a control panel near the end of the corridor. That one's lagging, she said. He looked at the screen. She was right. Want to go check it out? He asked. Zariah didn't answer. She was already walking. Sometimes the moment of real power is quiet. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't come with headlines or big stages. It comes when someone finally trusts you enough to mess up and still hands you the keys anyway, because people don't learn by being told don't touch. They learn by touching failing rebuilding and being allowed to do it all again. For Marcus, the badge wasn't about access. It was about trust. And for Zariah, it wasn't about status. It was permission to stay curious, even when the world preferred silence. She tapped the console, leaned in, and muttered to herself, Okay, let's see what this thing hides. Behind her, Marcus smiled again. He didn't know exactly what she'd find, but he knew this. Whatever she chose to take apart, she'd understand it better than anyone who'd ever built it. And that finally was enough. Zariah still took the city bus every morning. Same route, same torn seat by the window, same denim backpack with frayed straps and ink stains. Her notebook stayed on her lap, open to the latest page filled with new logic, gates, new ideas, new sketches. Most passengers never noticed her. Just a quiet little black girl with tangled braids, head down, pencil moving fast. She liked it that way. The badge Marcus gave her was tucked in the side pocket. She only wore it when she needed to enter the lab. The rest of the time it stayed hidden, like everything else that made her different. At Novatech, she was no longer a mystery. People greeted her by name. Some even asked questions now. She didn't always answer, but she listened. She watched. She kept building. Still, when the day was done, she walked out the same back exit her mom used. She didn't ask for rides. She didn't care for praise. The work was never about being seen. It was about seeing. One Thursday night, long after most had gone home, Marcus returned to the office. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was habit. Maybe he couldn't sleep. The halls were quiet. The kind of quiet only found in buildings meant for noise. He walked past dark meeting rooms, rows of empty desks, paused to check a printout someone had left in the copier tray. Then he stepped into the systems room. It was empty, but not untouched. Something about the air was different. A terminal still glowed faintly on the far wall. One of the vent fans was buzzing softer than usual, as if someone had adjusted the voltage. He moved toward his desk. That's when he saw it. A small piece of paper, torn from the edge of a notebook, folded once, left neatly on top of his keyboard. He opened it. The handwriting was careful, like someone had gone over each letter twice. "Thank you for actually seeing me." No signature. He stared at it for a long time. His hand holding it didn't move. He sat down, leaned back, and let the quiet return. Outside the window, the city stretched into itself, millions of people moving past each other, most never really noticing who was beside them. And in that moment, Marcus Vail, CEO of a billion-dollar company, a man once too busy for anything outside the quarterly agenda, realized something that hit harder than any boardroom failure ever could. He hadn't created Zariah's genius. He hadn't nurtured it. All he did was stop ignoring it. And that tiny act, pausing long enough to see her really see her, meant the world. Not because he changed her, but because it reminded him of who he used to be. A boy in a group home, tinkering with a broken radio, trying to tune into a world that had stopped listening. Zariah didn't need a mentor. She needed a window, and someone to stop pulling the blinds shut. He looked again at the note. "Thank you for actually seeing me." He thought about the truth hidden in those words. How many brilliant minds never got that chance? How many girls like Zariah had notebooks full of futures we'd never see? How many talents died quietly, not because they weren't enough, but because no one slowed down long enough to notice the world was full of people willing to reward Polish performance credentials. But it only took one person to reward potential. And tonight, sitting in the glow of a monitor still warm from someone else's fingertips, Marcus realized something else. He didn't need more engineers. He needed more eyes willing to see. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his wallet where his first business card used to be. He wouldn't forget again, because sometimes one moment of being truly seen is worth more than a lifetime of being ignored. And sometimes the smallest thanks speaks louder than any applause. Talent doesn't disappear. It gets buried beneath casual dismissal, polite exclusion, and systemic blindness. One glance with intention, one word of belief, one door cracked open. That's all it takes to change everything. Zariah didn't become brilliant because someone gave her permission. She was brilliant the whole time. She just needed someone to look her way without flinching, without judging, without doubting, and say, "You belong here." And once that happened, she never looked back. Because when you've been invisible your whole life and someone finally sees you, you don't waste the moment. You light it up. Zariah's story is one of quiet strength, of being overlooked, yet never giving up, of choosing to build instead of break even when the world gave her every reason to walk away. She reminded us that sometimes what a person needs most is not a spotlight, but simply to be seen, to be heard, to be trusted. Because the greatest kind of recognition isn't loud, it's gentle. It's when someone believes in you not because you proved yourself, but because they were willing to see what you carried long before anyone else could. And what about you? Have you ever been that child in the corner full of ideas, but no one stopped to ask? Have you ever wished someone saw more than just where you came from? If this story touched something in your heart, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might echo someone else's pain or give someone hope they didn't know they needed. And if you believe that stories like Zariah's deserve to be heard, to be remembered, and to remind others that brilliance can grow anywhere, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel. Together we can make sure no quiet light ever gets ignored again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.